the whole world seeing what's going on right now, telling the United States, you are genocidal now. Mr. Trump, who wants his Nobel Peace Prize. Nobel Peace Prize for your genocide? Give me a break.
Smotrich and others in the Israeli government have explicitly said that it is their desire to bury a Palestinian state. So how do you see a path forward with a two-state solution?
Israel, of course, will never agree to this. I want it to be imposed on Israel, pure and simple.
And we know that an impartial investigation simply will not happen because of the fact that Israel just will not allow it to happen. All right. My next guest is Jeffrey Sachs. He's a world-renowned economics professor, best-selling author, and one of the most prominent voices in sustainable development and public policy. Over the course of his career, he's advised governments around the world, as well as several UN Secretary Generals. But today, our conversation turns to Israel's ongoing genocide in Gaza. And so I'm going to ask him about America's foreign policy, its support for Israel, and why Professor Sachs still sees international organizations like the UN as the world's best hope for peace, despite the fact that they've been unable to bring an end to Israel's actions over the past 23 months. My name is Mohamed Hashem, and this is Real Talk. And he's here, Professor Jeffrey Sachs. Thank you so much for coming on Real Talk.
It's my pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
No, appreciate it, Professor. We don't have a lot of time today, and I have a lot of questions, so I'm going to try to squeeze in as much as possible. But let me start with this, Professor. So earlier this year, you wrote an open letter to Israel's foreign minister and government, where you said, quote, whether your oversights are the result of obtuseness or prevarication, they would be a tragedy for Israel alone were it not for the fact that you attempted to rope me and millions of other Jews into your government's crimes against humanity. And then you went on to say, Israel is the sovereign state of its citizens. I'm a Jew and a citizen of the United States. Israel is not my state and never will be. Now, let me start with this, Professor. Why did you feel compelled to write that?
Well, first of all, what the state of Israel is doing is criminal, obnoxious, genocidal, in my view, and it needs to be stopped. So this is the starting point. The foreign minister gave a talk at the UN where I was sitting right behind him in the UN Security Council. I found it completely obnoxious, aside from everything else. So I wrote the letter because I disagree wholeheartedly with the policies of the government of Israel. But I resent the fact that Israel claims to be speaking in the name of world Jewry, that is, of the worldwide community of people who call themselves Jews, which involves many different groups, different views, and so forth. But Israel does not speak for me. I'm an American-born Jew, and Israel is not my country. It's not my state. And I happen to find what Israel's doing completely unacceptable, aside from everything else. In the current context, there's another issue here. Not only is the government of Israel and the state of Israel presuming to rope me in to their war crimes because they say that Israel is the state of the Jewish people. It doesn't say it's a Jewish state, which would mean something different. It says it's the state of the Jewish people. But also in the United States right now, yep, and in Britain, and in Europe more generally, if you speak out against Israel, you're very often attacked by our governments as being anti-Semitic, which in common parlance means anti-Jewish. And this is not at all the fact. One can speak out against Israel because Israel's committing crimes. That's a good reason to speak out. In fact, I think it behooves us to speak out against Israel. That, to my mind, has nothing to do with speaking against Jews. In fact, I think it's the opposite. I think what Israel's doing is antithetical to the Jewish values that I understand as being core to Jewish culture and Jewish thought. But I also don't want this accusation that being against Israel and what the Israeli government is doing, let me put it more explicitly, is somehow anti-Semitic. I think that's completely obnoxious, false, and I think not just false, but motivated false. These are governments, whether in the UK or the US, want to clamp down on protests against Israel.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have a valid reason for doing that. They call it anti-Semitism because anti-Semitism is not a uh, not a proper attitude. They call it that, but it isn't that. It's about war crimes. It's about genocide. It's about mass murder. It's about mass starvation. It's not about being anti-Jewish.
Well, let me ask you this: if I could get a little bit personal with this question, Professor. I
Yep.
mean, how have you been seeing this discourse kind of become entrenched in American public opinion or American debate, especially with the circles that surround you growing up and other times as well? Currently, in light of the genocide in Gaza, this whole idea of the conflation between nationality and religion, and this idea that only if Jews in America can only be safe if Israel is in turn safe. What do you make this narrative in public discourse?
The narrative at some level has been there for a while
Yeah.
because after World War II, uh, most of us in America, American Jews, lost family members in the Nazi Holocaust. Uh, I have family members in Israel, cousins, second cousins, and so forth. So the idea, as I was growing up, that Israel is a safe refuge for some Jews or Jews that are choosing to live there was a kind of norm, but not, I would say, a deeply examined one, at least in the communities that where I grew up. And it wasn't really such a controversial one uh, for me as a young child in any way until the developments of politics in the after 1967, I would say, when Israel uh, conquered the remaining parts of Palestine, occupied Gaza, the West Bank, and East Jerusalem. I went to Israel the first time in 1972,
Mm-hmm.
um, so already 53 years ago. And I was told already at the time, it was explained to me that Israel was starting to make settlements in the occupied territories to make, and I heard the expression first there, facts on the ground. This was already put to me a half century ago. So I continued to travel to Israel. I was very supportive of something called Peace Now or Shalom Achav in Hebrew, which was the idea that there should be peace and a two-state solution uh, for creating a state of Palestine alongside a state of Israel. Well, I would say from the 1990s onwards, certainly, and one could argue that it predates that. So, detailed question. Israel went more and more to the right, to militarism, to extremism, to a radicalization of society in many ways, to a brutality of society. So I watched that happen over the last 35, 40 years myself. I haven't been to Israel in many years. I have no plan or intention to go back, perhaps ever. What's happened has been really, in a way, shocking. Uh, how violent and vulgar and murderous uh, the government of Israel has become, but
Mm-hmm.
according to the opinion surveys, broad-based views in Israeli society as well. Many, many things happened, but basically the continued occupation of Palestine and the rise to power of the Israeli right wing and the emergence of an extremist religious right wing, all shaped by similar historic processes, drove Israeli society to a place that is unrecognizable for me from my youth. Israel is out and out genocidal in its intentions right now, in its statements, in its actions. How can any government in the world be starving to death up to 2 million people right now before our eyes in the TikTok age?
Sure.
So this is something, to my mind, that is not only profoundly illegal, profoundly disheartening, but in a way profoundly shocking. Now, if you go back, you can find ideological roots of this. You can explain some of this.
But can I interject here,
say
Professor?
to me, yeah.
Because listening to you give that answer, especially how you've been going to Israel when you were younger, and listening to how you've described what you just said, if I didn't have any context, I would be like, well, a two-state solution is effectively impossible based on the answer you just gave. But knowing where you stand and knowing that you actually still see, despite everything that's going on right now, you still see a two-state solution as the way forward. It's very hard to see what you're seeing, and I'm basing this just on the history that you just outlined. And if I were to even bring in the United States, as I know that you know, probably since Jimmy Carter, we've had successive American presidents wanting to have a two-state solution. But, because of the fact that you have Israeli governments not wanting to give that solution, or actually wanting to give Palestinians a state, and adding to that the presence of the pro-Israel lobby in the United States, putting pressure anytime an American president or an American government wanted to find a solution, it is really hard seeing that outcome through, especially in light of Israel's actions the past 22, 23 months. Not to mention the fact, that Smotrich and others in the Israeli governments have explicitly said that it is their desire to bury a Palestinian state. So how do you see a path forward with a two-state solution?
First, I agree with you completely, every word you just said. I'm not saying this is a high probability. I'm trying to find a path to survival of the Palestinian people, first of all, before they are slaughtered, starved, expelled, crushed, or faced with the prospect of brutal apartheid rule for years and years to come. So that's the first point. I'm, in my day job, I'm an economist and a policy expert, and have been involved in policy and diplomacy, and have worked with more than 100 governments around the world for more than 45 years. So I'm looking for solutions, what to do. It should be understood in that. I often propound solutions that don't come about, by the way. So I'm not saying this is high probability. I'm trying to find a way forward. People say to me, by the way, why aren't you in favor of a one-state solution? I'd say, fine. I have no objection to that either. A binational solution. I just think it's far less likely than even the unlikely solution that I'm actually proposing. So I'm not talking in theoretical terms. I'm talking in practical terms. Now, in practical terms, I see the following. I work at the UN every day. I speak with dozens of ambassadors probably every month, at least to say hello, to chat. I would say 180 of the 193 UN member states support a two-state solution. This is very good because it's part of international law. It's part of the International Court of Justice ruling last year. It was just declared the policy of the UN General Assembly on July 29th, a month ago, in a high-level session on implementing the two-state solution. There is almost unanimous backing in the world for the two-state solution. I would estimate that 95% of the world's population live in countries where their governments support the two-state solution, and 5% live in countries where governments are opposed.
But it's the 5% that can make it happen, right?
So the U.S. is 4.1% of the world population. Then there's Israel, which is a tiny sliver, and then there's, by the way, Micronesia, Vanuatu, Nauru, Papua New Guinea, and the only two countries that aren't microscopic left are Paraguay and Argentina under Milei. Okay, this is tiny. The overwhelming will of the world is for a state of Palestine now. My argument is that Israel's government is completely delusional and genocidal, by the way. That's part of the delusions. And Israel, of course, will never agree to this. So I'm not talking about an Oslo process or the final stage of negotiations or something negotiated. I want it to be imposed on Israel, pure and simple. Now, under the UN Charter, it can be imposed on Israel by the UN Security Council. Just one fly in the ointment, which is the United States government, which vetoes this. Mm-hmm. The rest of the world favors it. So, yes, in practical terms, I'm trying to change the US government position. And I have three things on my side. One, it's the right thing to do. What's happening now is not in the US interest at all. Phony. Yes, it's in the interest maybe of the Zionist lobby, but it is not in the interest of the American people. It doesn't benefit us in security terms, in moral terms, in economic terms, nothing. Mm-hmm. So it's totally antithetical to US interests to be complicit in Israel's genocide. That's number one. Second, the entire world, as I've said, other than that handful of tiny places and a couple not quite microscopic places and the US, are against Israel's position and are in favor of the two-state solution. So that is a second very practical point, that the U.S. can be really helped to understand that we're completely isolated. If the U.S. thinks that its future lies with Israel and Vanuatu and Nauru against the rest of the world, well, I don't think that makes much sense. Then the third point, very important, is the American people, who aren't asked very much about this, are sick of this. And the opinion polls show that they are overwhelmingly in favor of a state of Palestine, the two-state solution, and overwhelmingly against what Israel is doing. So this is not the case that the crazy American people, there are some crazy American people, but this is not the case that this is somehow emanating from below. So whether it's emanating from the Epstein files or emanating from AIPAC or emanating from bad habits or emanating from ignorance, there are all sorts of theories, but this is not emanating from the view of the American public opinion. And though our country is hardly democratic in spirit, and foreign policy is not driven by public opinion in the United States, and we have a military-industrial complex that runs the United States. Mm-hmm. I understand all of that. It's still true that when the gap is so wide between the politicians, who are pretty pathetic, let's be clear, and the American public, there's at least a tension because we have a semblance of democracy in the United States. Now, one of the ways that they want to narrow the gap is by this crackdown on the kinds of things I'm saying right now. This is clear. But the fact of the matter is, in a world of social media, where the social media every day on its feed is demonstrating Israel's genocide of the Palestinian people, crackdowns don't work very well.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this in practical terms as well, since you mentioned the UN, and you've been a strong advocate for the UN for years, and you've written about it in your book, A New Foreign Policy Beyond American Exceptionalism, about living by the UN Charter. But let me give you this example. I think a lot of people have been questioning the role of the UN the past 23 months in terms of its relevance and its ability to put an end to something like what's happening right now in Gaza. But let me give you an even more direct example. At the time of us recording this yesterday, as I'm sure you have seen, Professor, Israel did a double tap strike against on the Nasser hospital in Gaza, where it killed rescue workers and journalists. Now, what the UN has said in light of that attack is that it basically called for an impartial investigation. Now, we've seen that happen dozens of times with respect to Israel and its actions. And we know that an impartial investigation simply will not happen because of the fact that Israel just will not allow it to happen. And so my question here is, how do we get to a place where the UN can do something different moving forward and actually meaningful on the ground?
Well, let me just say one very specific thing, which is that the difference of where we are today and a state of Palestine that is the 194th UN member state and recognized by essentially all the world except Israel is one vote in the UN Security Council. So just from a completely tactical, very narrow point of view, if the United States changes its vote to stop its veto on the state of Palestine membership in the UN, Palestine becomes a member state. So this is something that could happen in an hour from now. This is not a heavy lift. Then you might say, yeah, but what does that change? Israel will continue to do what it does. It will still have 600,000 settlers in the West Bank. It will, yes, of course, that is true. But what I wanted to do first is to put an end to the delusion, the murderous delusion of Smotrich, Ben-Gvir, Netanyahu, and a lot of the Israeli people that they're going to hold on to this territory forever, because they ain't. And that needs to be said at the outset, not at the end. It needs to be said irrevocably at the outset. Your borders are the 4th of June, 1967, period, according to international law, as determined once again by the International Court of Justice in 2024. Now, following that, if the U.S. changed its position, there could be the interposition of security forces under the UN Security Council. There could be sanctions against Israel. There could be a suspension of Israel in the UN itself. There could be a military suspension of any military equipment. Many things could be done to bring this to fruition. I admit, I understand fully. It depends on the United States. But my point is, it doesn't depend on changing dozens of governments. It depends on ending the complicity in genocide of the US government. And the American people get it. They get it as much as they can in our propaganda-filled world. They're 70% on board on this. So we're talking about, from my point of view, as of this morning, one vote, which puts a completely different dynamic into play. If you say, A, what's the chance? B, will it really work? C, what happens then with the settlers? This, that. Yes, I will throw up my hands like everyone else and say, this ain't easy. I'm trying to find a practical way. There are 8 million Palestinian Arabs and there are 8 million Jews in Israel, and I don't want them to. I don't want the Jews to kill all the Palestinians. That's the way it's going right now, or to expel them. And I think the best thing is security on both sides, even if it's a wall a mile high. There should be a state of Palestine right now, immediately, and Israel should get the heck out and stop its murder. And that's what I'm trying to see how to do. And I think we're much closer to that possibility, and that there's a very practical roadmap. Of course, we got Trump, we've got the AIPAC, we've got the Israel lobby. I understand all of that. I've lived with that all my life. But again, the only two pincers that I see is the whole world seeing what's going on right now, telling the United States, you are genocidal now. Mr. Trump, who wants his Nobel Peace Prize. Nobel Peace Prize for your genocide? Give me a break. And look at the American people. They are against what is being done in the name of the American people. It makes it at least possible to move forward. By the way, the Arab world, the Arab League, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, which is meeting in Jeddah these days, is very, very clear. There can be demilitarization, there can be mutual security, there can be solutions that are very practical. This is not a moment, other than in Israel's behavior, of high ideology. This is actually a moment of pragmatism. Stop mass murder. And there's a lot of good thinking going on in the Arab League, in Saudi, in Egypt. I'm in touch with the diplomats. They want very practical things. Where are people in Gaza going to live? How are they going to survive? Who's going to do the rebuilding? How is the Palestinian Authority going to govern? How is Hamas going to be demilitarized or ended as a militant movement as part of the two-state solution? And I say, yes, implement the first day that Palestine is irrevocably the 194th UN member state. Then we move in a completely different direction from the utter stupidity and violence of the way that we're discussing this currently. And by we, I mean in the United States.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I know you were hoping that the Security Council would make that vote in April 2024, but then the Biden government struck it down. But let me ask you this, because I'm realizing
I thought the Biden government was the worst, but okay, each one proves me wrong. The next one and the next one and the next one.
No, go ahead. You can expand on that, Professor.
No. All I'm saying is I can't believe how bad American governance is. Year after year, administration after administration, it just gets worse and worse.
Yeah. And this will be my last question, because I'm aware of your time constraints. But Canada, the UK, France, Australia, they've all said that they've pledged basically that they will recognize Palestine. Some of these countries have actually placed stipulations, but they've said that they'll recognize Palestinian statehood with these stipulations in September, which many have criticized as treating Palestinian statehood as a bargaining chip, the fact that they placed these stipulations. But what do you expect to see from these pledges come September?
Well, let me say, some of these announcements are really surprising and should be viewed as such. The Anglo-Saxon world has been the hegemonic world for the last 200 years. Britain, I think arguably is even worse than the United States in its historic behavior. I have a theorem that all problems in the world go back to the British. So I'm utterly unsympathetic to the cruelty and delusions that still dominate British government thinking, by the way, also in Ukraine. MI6, it's awful. It's got a very long, perfidious tradition. And here we have the Anglo-Saxon countries, because this isn't just a group of countries. These are the Anglo-Saxon countries. These are the Five Eyes. This is the U.S. spy network or the CIA MI6 spy network saying we have to change what Israel's doing. So this is not a small thing, actually, that Canada and Australia and Britain are standing up. There's one more Anglo-Saxon country to go. That's mine, the United States. We're getting closer. And the fact that it is Canada, Australia, believe me, to break away Canada, Australia, and Britain from US foreign policy, remember, foreign policy is run by the CIA, the MI6. That's the most important node of foreign policy in the Anglo-Saxon world and in the Western world, in fact. And now we're seeing even that splintering over this issue. So these announcements are not small things, actually. They show how close we are to the break point. Israel has pushed itself to this murderous, vulgar, openly genocidal attack against the Palestinians. It's changed global understanding.
We'll leave it here, Professor Sachs. You're going to have to promise me to come on longer for next time.
Of course, we'll do it again soon.
I really do appreciate your time, sir. Thank you so much for coming on Real Talk.
Great to be with you.